Hey guys, Rick Stone here from Our Stoney Acres. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we're going to answer the question, can you still plant a garden in June? So maybe some of you have put things off a little bit too long, and here it is June already, and you're wondering, can I actually even bother putting something in and still get a harvest? And so we're going to answer that question for you today. I've got 6 crops that you should be able to very dependably get planted and still harvest this year, and then a couple others that you might make it depending on where you live. So this video is kind of designed for those of you that live in zones 4 through 7. Those of us that have cold weather, but not like massively cold weather, and a frost date and things like that. So this should work out for those of you that work, kind of live in those zones. So before we get started though, make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Click that notification bell so that you can notice every time I release new videos, which is about once a week. And then also do me a favor, we're just getting started over on Instagram. Please go over and follow us there as well. We try and do something about every day, and so I would love to have you come join us there as well. Okay, so let's talk about the 6 crops that you probably should be able to get planted in June and still get a harvest before your frost arrives. And again, this is for those of us that live in maybe zones 4 through 7. Those in zones 6 and 7 are going to have an easier time making this happen than those of you that are in zones 4 and 5. If you're in zones 4 and 5, you need to get on this right away in order for you to really make this dependable and actually get a harvest. Okay, so here we go with our 6 crops that you can be planting in June. Number 1 on the list is tomatoes. Yes, believe it or not, you can get some tomatoes still planted in June and get a harvest, but you're going to have to make sure that you're fairly specific in what you get planted. So we're looking for short maturing varieties of tomatoes. So these are going to be smaller fruited tomatoes, the tomatoes that are, baseball size or smaller, or cherry tomatoes. You should be able to grow those get them planted in June and still get a harvest. Varieties that you ought to be looking at are things like Early Girl, 4th of July. There's one called Tigerella that does a really good job. Juliet, which is a Roma tomato. Pretty much any of the Romas would be okay. And then cherry tomatoes like Sun Gold, Sun Sugar, any of the pear tomatoes. All of those are fairly short season, and so you should still be able to get them to harvest by your fall frost. But you can't be planting them from seeds. You've got to try and find some seedlings somewhere and put in seedlings. So you need to hurry to your nursery and see if they've still got some tomato seedlings left and get those in, and you should still be able to get a harvest. Next on our list is summer squash. So all of the different summer squashes, which includes zucchini, yellow squash, the yellow crookneck squash, and the patty pan squashes, all of those are fairly short maturing varieties of squashes. So you should start getting a harvest about 60 to 70 days after you've planted seeds from those crops, which means you've got plenty of time. So get them in anytime during the month of June, and you should still get a pretty good dependable harvest. The other nice thing about those is that you can use those to replace some of the crops that maybe you're losing to pests or to diseases or problems like that. So get those guys in. All of those crops, again, are pretty short maturing, and you should still get a pretty good harvest from your summer squashes if you get them planted in June. Next on our list is green beans, and green beans are a good choice because they're fairly quick to mature. But I want you to focus on bush varieties, okay? If you live in zone 6 and 7, you might still be able to get away with planting some pole beans and get a harvest from them. But if you really want to make sure that you get a dependable harvest, then I would choose some bush varieties, because bush varieties are usually starting to flower and get fruit on them about 60 to 70 days after you've planted them. So again, we should still have plenty of time in June to get those guys in. So focus on those bush varieties, and you should have a good dependable harvest starting in mid-August to September, and should be in pretty good shape with green beans. Number 5 on our list is kind of a broad category, and that is herbs. So most of your herbs should still have plenty of time to mature, even if you're planting them from seed. So things like basil and parsley and oregano, all of those should still have plenty of time to mature, either from seed, or even better, if you can find some seedlings at your local nursery, that would even be a better choice. But all of those planted in June should still give you plenty of harvest throughout the summer and be a really good option for you to get going during the month of June. Last of our really dependable crops to get planted in June would be sweet corn. And again, we're going to have to be looking at some very specific sweet corns here. So we want to be looking at shorter maturing varieties that start maturing in 60 to 70 days is what we're looking for. One of the varieties that I have grown in the past that has been really dependable for me when I've got a short season is called Early Sun Glow. It's a good corn. Wasn't the most amazing corn. It is a sweet corn, but it's not like your super sweets. So it's not like Serendipity or Peaches and Cream or, you know, some of those really super sweet varieties. But it is a good solid corn, and it definitely does mature in about 60 to 70 days. And so there was one year where we ended up not getting our garden planted until June because we had just moved. And that's what I planted, and we got plenty of corn that year, and it was a good choice. So that would be your last of the really dependable crops, okay? Now, there are a couple of other things that you can be planting in June if you want to experiment, and you're going to be risking losing them to the frost, and so you may be frustrated, but you could do some winter squashes. And again, I would focus on the shorter maturing varieties, the smaller fruits, so things like acorn squash, butternut squash, and maybe even some spaghetti squash might get ready if you get them planted early in June. Especially if you live in zone 6 and 7, you probably have a pretty good shot at getting those finished before the end of the summer. Zones 4 and 5, you're a little bit risky there, but you might actually still get those as well. The other thing would be some melons. So if you're interested in growing some melons, you could still grow some of the smaller varieties of melons. And again, we're looking for short season varieties. Things like icebox watermelons or cantaloupes, those would probably all be able to mature on time. But again, I say probably. A little less dependable because those are longer maturing. They're more like 90 to 100 days. And so it's kind of iffy as to whether or not you'll get a harvest from those, but you could definitely give them a try if you want to experiment and see how things go. And again, it really depends a lot on when your frost date is. If your frost doesn't arrive until mid-October, you're probably going to be okay with both the winter squashes and some of the smaller melons. So give it a try, okay? Now, there is one other thing that you can be doing in June that will actually be preparing for your fall crops as well, okay? And I did a whole video on this last year, and so I'm going to link that video right up here. But know that in June, a lot of us can be starting our fall cabbage family crops. So we're talking here about things like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, collards, kale, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi. Any of those, you'll want to be starting those indoors in your seed starting setup sometime in June or early July. It really depends on where you live and when your first fall frost date is. You want to be targeting putting those out about 6 weeks before your first fall frost. And so for many of us, that's going to be sometime in August or early September, which means if we need 8 weeks to bring those seedlings up to size to get them out into the garden, then June is the time that we're going to be planting those. So again, check out that video. Gives you a lot more instructions on that and how you can extend your growing season into the fall using some of those crops. Now, speaking of extending your growing season, if you are interested in learning more about growing in the fall and even in the winter time, I have a mini course that's free. It's a year-round gardening mini course, and it's about 30 to 35 minutes long, and there's a link down in the description below that you can click on and go sign up for that course. It's a great little course. Good introduction to the year-round gardening concept, and so I would encourage you, if you're interested in that, to click on the link below and go check out that course, okay? All right, my friends, that is all I have for you for this week. Hopefully this video was helpful for you. It's not too late. You know, you can get out there and get something planted still in June, even if you haven't gotten your garden planted yet. So get out there and get some things going, and you should have some successful crops, okay? All right, that's it for this week. We'll see you next week. Everybody have a great week. Happy gardening.